Everybody, and welcome back to our Ag Ventura, virtual Ag Ventura. We're enjoying our time so far, spending so many sessions right in Ventura County, and we're going to just continue with that right now. And so I am really pleased to be introducing Dr. Rose Hayden Smith from California Agriculture and Natural Resource Emeritus is what we'll call her. But Rose is an expert as far as victory gardens are concerned. And we first got to know Rose back in, I looked it up, it was 2006 when she presented to our conference, when we hosted our conference down in Burbank. And it was a great presentation, and when we were looking at what needed to be shared during this pandemic, it seemed like victory gardens are more popular than ever. And who could tell us more information about victory gardens than Dr. Rose Hayden Smith? So Rose, it's so great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be with you all today.
That's great. We're thrilled to have you. Tell us what you know.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and tell you a little bit what I know. And I hope that you'll nudge me if because I can go on this topic. I absolutely am passionate about this topic. So one of the things, I spent a big portion of my career as a garden-based educator. I ran a 4-H program in Ventura County, the Master Gardener program, and garden-based education and agricultural education was sort of my bread and butter. And I do happen to be a U.S. historian. So today I want to talk to you about victory gardens in a new era and how we cultivate possibility in a time of pandemic. And I think there is a lot of possibility inherent in the moment. So where we find ourselves right now, just seemingly crisis after crisis, right? We have a global pandemic, a global health crisis. We're having all sorts of crises that are arising from a changing climate, political crises, not just in our country, but across the globe. And I would say, just a lot of cultural crisis right now that we find ourselves in. And I think that we have been in places like this in the past, and we can learn from that. And I would also, want to thank all of you as educators who are navigating a new way during this time of crisis and doing incredible work, and also looking ahead to how we might continue agricultural education and gardening education. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history. So in this country, we have an incredible tradition of gardening. We have this deep ethos of kitchen gardens. In 1893, we had an economic and social crisis in this nation, and really impacted urban areas. And so new models were developed that related to vacant lot cultivation and urban farming and urban agriculture. And by 1896, we had 19 large US cities that were doing vacant lot cultivation and also urban farms. We have this tradition of progressivism that has brought us organizations like Cooperative Extension, where I spent my career, and as a result, programs like 4-H and Master Gardener program and Progressivism FFA, right? We have a huge interest in gardening going on in this nation. And as someone who has studied gardening movements in the United States, I haven't seen anything like this. And it really seems to be driven by a lot of things. So one of the things is you're all interested in school gardens, right? And It might surprise you to know that at the turn of the last century, the United States had an incredibly robust school garden movement. And if you come to this conference next year, and I hope you will, back in Ventura, you might have an opportunity to visit one of those school gardens that at that historic site. There has been some gardening activity at, fairly consistently since before World War One. And so you might have an opportunity to see that garden. But again, we have these things that drove the Victory Garden movement. So Victory Garden movement, most of us think of World War II. And in fact, there was an iconic Victory Garden movement in World War II. But actually, the Victory Garden movement started in World War One. It was initially called the Liberty Garden movement, and it originated in the United Kingdom and Canada. And the US, of course, entered the war late. And so we started calling them Liberty Gardens, but very quickly changed the term to Victory Garden. And the idea was to create school, home, community, and even workplace gardens across the United States. And so when we declared war on Germany, Woodrow Wilson actually said in his address to Congress that food will win the war. And I know that you've all seen these posters, and that's one of the things that fascinates me the most about this movement is the sort of poster art that drove messages. And so look at this, Uncle Sam Says Garden. And so you might consider the poster art of World War One and World War II to be social media today. And I actually have a theory that one of the sort of drivers behind this interest in gardening right now actually is the use of social media, Instagram and Facebook. And we're just seeing so many people that are gardening during this pandemic. So again, there was a national program in World War One. And I want to talk to you a little bit in detail about one of those programs. And it was called the United States School Garden Army. And it was actually a program that was created by the Bureau of Education, and it was rolled out across the United States, mostly targeting urban and suburban kids, with the idea of teaching them about gardening it was also implied agriculture. And this program was actually framed as being essential to national security in World War One. And President Wilson funded this national curriculum, this national program with money from the War Department. That's how essential it was. And there were a lot of reasons to target school kids. So in general, for the wartime programs, these Victory and Liberty Garden programs and the United States School Garden Army, the goals were to prevent civil unrest because there were concerns about the war disrupting food supply on the American home front. We got a tiny taste of a disrupted, sort of food and goods system in the early days of our pandemic, when people, couldn't get certain items and things like that. But there was never really a concern about national food security. There was also in World War One a big issue about ag labor shortages, and because we were drafting men and sending them abroad to fight. And in California, one of these sort of under the umbrella of these Victory Garden programs that was very successful was the Woman's Land Army. And the mobilized mostly middle class women, mostly white women, a lot of college co-eds to go harvest agricultural crops in California and across the nation. We also needed to feed troops and European allies. And there was this sense that gardening could strengthen democracy and that it was a unifying activity and that it could bring together urban and rural and immigrant and native born and rich and poor and sort of be a unifying activity. And in my experience as a garden educator, gardening really does transcend a lot of differences in our lives. There were also goals around reducing the food mile and making the food system more local by having more food produced in gardens in a community. And it's really interesting during this pandemic, one of the bright spots has been local food production, right? And farmers markets and CSAs. But a big part of this was to teach youth about food, because even at the turn of the last century, there was a concern about where the next generation of farmers would come from, and a concern about the disconnect between Americans who were increasingly urbanized and their food, right? And that they didn't understand farming. And so this was a big deal. I want you to look at this poster. Follow the Pied Piper, join the United States School Garden Army. This poster, if you look in the background, shape of an American flag. All right. So you could get information about gardening in World War I and World War II. Federal government made lots of information available. This is a 32-page booklet, and it tells you everything about how to plan your victory garden, what to plant by season, how to construct a cold frame, how to construct a raised bed, pest treatment, all sorts of things, right? And they also had these handbooks for school teachers to work with kids that were sort of coordinated with different growing regions across the nation. What I find really fascinating about this booklet is that it was sent to you or given to you by the War Department. And again, food production, even on the home front, viewed as being essential to national security. Here's a poster of the Woman's Land Army. This one, I love this poster. You can see the artist is foreshadowing the flapper of the 20. The women are wearing bifurcated skirts, pants. They've got bobbed hair. Here's a U.S. School Garden member. He's an urban boy. He's wearing a newsboy cap. He's got an American flag on his tie. Raised him myself in the U.S. School Garden Army. You could register your war garden. And in fact, there were really different understandings during both World War I and World War II about private property rights and where you could garden. And one of the things that I do think that we need to bring back in this era when we get beyond this pandemic is the notion of how we use public space for gardens. And so in both World War I and World War II, you would have found victory gardens not only on at the White House, but on the National Mall, in Boston Common, in front of city halls, in Times Square, there was a demonstration garden. These gardens were everywhere, and this idea that you could actually use vacant land to garden was really helpful, because not everyone, past or present, has access to land. Okay, so these programs in World War I were a huge success, and they helped the United States be successful in its wartime mobilization. So during the Depression, which comes very quickly after World War I, because the Depression in rural America hit about 10 years before the crash in 1929, we did city relief gardening, and there were school gardens, urban homesteads, and you have this New Deal agriculture that sort of remakes the American food system into the sort of modern food system that we would recognize. Now, World War II comes along, and within a couple of weeks of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States Department of Agriculture convened a National War Garden Conference in Washington, D.C. And there wasn't the sense of urgency around a victory garden program, but it gained traction nonetheless. And it was one of the most successful and iconic wartime mobilization programs during World War II. But the big focus was not on food security or civil unrest. The big focus was on what the government called nutritional defense, the idea of improving American health, as well as sort of encouraging the storage and preservation of food with those sort of Depression era themes, reducing food costs. But really, the big focus was on improving American health. So here is Vice President Henry Wallace in his Victory Garden. And for those of you who are really interested in agricultural policy, you'll know that Henry Wallace was our USDA secretary during the New Deal. And he, in many ways, was the architect of the modern food system that we have now. And he was Roosevelt's first vice president. And so here he is in his Victory Garden at the vice president's residence. So this Food Commandments poster, I know that many of us have seen it. It's one of my favorite posters. And I think it has a lot that could inform our work today. So look at item 4, buy local foods. When I first saw this poster, I went, this can't be real, but it is. And it was actually published in 1919. And the poster was so popular, it was dusted off and used again in World War II. Okay, so the World War II program, it's estimated that 3 out of every 5 US households gardened during World War II. Up to potentially 40% of the fresh fruits and vegetables consumed on the American home front were likely produced in school, home, community, and workplace gardens. And food preservation was sort of off the charts. And even in the sort of war acts and the way that the federal government organizes systems of production during wartime, there was a carve out for steel for home canning purposes. And it was recognized as being very, very important, right? Food preservation. So post-World War, we go to more of from regional to a national cuisine. And part of that is because you've had this massive draft in World War II that has changed how Americans eat. Americans have moved all over the country during World War II, and a great period of disruption on the home front with people going all over the place following war work. We see improvements to the food system. We get a national highway system. And that, again, is based on the World War I experiences of Dwight Eisenhower, who, as a military officer, a young military officer in World War I, was tasked with leading a convoy across the United States to test road readiness. And it was an abject failure because we didn't have a very good road system. And so one of the things he did was, sign legislation for a national highway system, which has been a game changer for the American food system. And that's one of the things that makes it possible for strawberries that are grown in Ventura in February to be eaten on the East Coast, in the winter. We also see the rise of suburbs and lawn. There are a lot of societal changes that happen too. For many people post-World War, many Americans, not all, but many, you see sort of greater economic prosperity and changing educational patterns and work patterns. So I get asked a lot about this gardening surge and interest we see right now. I was very active at the national level when the Obamas put in the garden at the White House there. And there was a crazy amount of interest in gardening in that sort of 2008, through, basically through both terms of his administration. And so the White House garden went in, first time that we've had a vegetable garden at the White House since World War II, by the way, in 2009. And the interest was just really overwhelming in gardening. But I think one of the things that I've thought of a lot as an historian, especially a historian who has a sort of carve out specialty in media, in my case, poster art, is that, these social media platforms that we use like Facebook and things like that, they were sort of in their infancy in 2008 and 2009, right? And there wasn't even Instagram. And I do think that the social media presence right now about gardening is really going to help us sustain the effort, because the goal should be to sustain the effort. There's another notable national vegetable garden that appeared in the Obama era, and that was the USDA People's Garden. And I was able to serve on an advisory committee for that garden. And it's on the lawn, there where the Witten building, if you don't know about that, it's the only federal agency that has a building sort of bordering right on the National Mall. And this is an organic garden that's run by volunteers and by USDA employees who donate their time. And it's an absolutely beautiful vegetable garden. If you ever get a chance to go see that, it's remarkable. And it says a lot about our country, about privileging space in sort of our most sacred space, the National Mall, for a vegetable garden. But we have had these other sort of surges of interest in gardening, and California Ag in the Classroom, instrumental in driving and maintaining interest in California and supporting the school garden movement in California, which again is robust and has been robust. And going back to the World War I program, a sort of bit of trivia is that the leader of that National School Garden Army was the Los Angeles Unified School District Superintendent. Because Southern California was viewed as one of the national leaders in school gardens. So I think one of the things that I kind of, as we, I conclude these comments and we open it up to questions and answers, that I want to talk to you about is what we can do. So the heart of communities are schools. And I think that going forward, as we emerge from this pandemic, it's going to be a while, right? I mean, I'm a World War I historian, and pandemics last for a while. And we have so many similarities to World War I right now in this nation, not only in terms of the pandemic, but in terms of racial tensions and sort of just where we find ourselves on a lot of fronts. I think schools can provide access to communities for land, because again, a lot of people don't have access to do a home garden. I think that we ought to be using schools to pivot out to homes. And that was the model in World War I, is the school garden program. Yes, there was a presence at the school, but a big part of it was preparing the kids to take the gardening gospel, as it was termed, home to families and also do home gardens. So the way that teachers are just critical influencers on children and young adults, and the way that that influence flows out to families and communities, right? There is such a strong potential for schools to basically serve as a resource hub, to provide space perhaps for demonstration gardens as we open up, to provide access to facilities and meeting rooms for community groups that might want to launch garden efforts. Schools are obviously a conduit to our national feeding programs, and how we might be able to connect school gardens to that. Schools are where we have collaboration. It's where people of all kinds meet. And I would say use this time, right? So we're all operating in the dark here, and all operating sort of in from a place of faith, right? And as a gardener, what I could say to you is that this is a time when we think about planting bulbs and things that we can't see the result of right now, but that we learn, we plan, we prepare, we do what we can to sustain interest in gardens and agriculture and teaching youth and families about our food system, and that we use this time to plan and prepare for this enormous potential and the ways that gardens will help us come together and reintegrate in the aftermath of the pandemic. And so with that, I do have a book. It's not a how-to about gardening. It is a how-to about policies. And if you like history, you'll like the book. I also have a website where I blog, rosehadensmith.com. I still do some blogging for the university at the UC Food Observer. I'm always happy to hear from you. Reach out. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Rose. I said it's so soothing to sit and listen to your common sense. Thank you very much. Let's see. One question that was posted was, where can they find resources to start a garden, maybe with a Victory Garden theme? What can you share?
Okay, so one of the really wonderful things that we have going on in this state is the University of California Master Gardener Program, right? And the resources work hand in hand with our California Ag in the Classroom Foundation resources, right? And so you can find practical information about how to start gardens. And there's a Master Gardener program in every county. And I also want to give you another bit of trivia, is that the Master Gardener program, it's part of cooperative extension. The headwaters of that program is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And if you ever go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and go to the Master Gardener page there, within 3 clicks, you can be your county Master Gardener program. Reach out to the County Master Gardener program. They're also, 4-H has a lot of curriculum about gardens nationally. So much gardening and nutrition curriculum, a lot of which has been developed in partnership with the USDA, like the SNAP-Ed curriculum that's, nutrition and their gardening activities. I also would suggest too that if you're interested in the 4-H curriculum, in addition to all the stuff the University of California has, the Texas A&M program has a junior Master Gardener curriculum that I think is beautiful, and it integrates across the curriculum, right? And, they've also done the research about the ways in which gardening benefits kids. So if there is anyone that's still not sold on the value of ag education and gardening, you can pull up all the research about increased academic achievement, better cooperation and collaborative skills, which are going to be essential to kids because the impact on mental health of kids right now, I'm so scared. And I see this gardening and ag education, getting kids out into nature, as being really critical activities that we can do now, and that resources we can offer up to families now.
Great words, and you're so right. We have so many wonderful student in the garden mental health examples that have been shared. Well, mostly, Rose, I want to say that everyone wants to make sure that they can get your presentation. And who was the last group you mentioned that has the junior gardening program? That was Texas?
Texas A&M. And it's really a remarkable curriculum. And one of the things I have to give just a shout out to their cooperative extension and just cooperative extension nationally across the United States. These 4-H nutrition and garden-based educators at your land-grant universities have been doing things like Facebook Live activities. I mean, it's just been amazing. And also what teachers have made available to students. Absolutely astounding.
We have a record number of nutrition educators on this conference, participating in the conference, yes. And a lot from UC, so hopefully we all network and we continue to grow the project. Most of the comments here, Rose, are just thank you, and great shout out to everybody. Let's see, this one says, thank you for presenting this topic today. I've been looking forward to it since the conference was announced. So at any rate, I want to
see really quickly, I see a question about a Victory Garden themed grab and go kits for elementary students for at-home gardening. If you were, one of the things I always recommend for elementary school students is something that germinates quickly. Like carrots. You can also get some really good ideas about how to make you know, the plastic bag germinating kits that you can put in the windows. But I would load people with resources, and if you have time to find local resources about who might have soil, where the community gardens are, things like that would be helpful.
I think that's the success of our gardening programs up and down the state, is really the community supports it. And so they're gonna, you know, everybody kind of plays a role in it and then has a little bit of ownership in them. So very nice, Rose. Thank you so much for being here.